The wind howled through the desolate valley, a barren expanse of jagged rocks and shifting shadows. At its center stood an ancient stone structure, the Vault of Echoes. Legends spoke of this place, a fortress carved deep into the earth where time itself lay fractured. Few had ventured into its depths, and even fewer had returned. For Marcus Hale and his crew, the vault was not a legend, but an opportunity, a chance to secure fame and fortune. Marcus, a seasoned explorer and treasure hunter, had spent years chasing whispers about the vault. Now he stood at its threshold, the weight of his ambition pressing heavily on his shoulders. Behind him stood his team: Gregor, a burly ex-soldier; Simon, a wiry tech expert; and Elias, a historian whose encyclopedic knowledge of ancient ruins was matched only by his nervous disposition. Together, they had faced countless dangers, but nothing had prepared them for what awaited inside the vault. The descent. "Are we sure about this?" Elias asked, his voice trembling. He adjusted his glasses and glanced nervously at the gaping entrance. "We've come too far to turn back now," Marcus replied, his tone resolute. He held up a map, its edges frayed and ink faded. "The artifact is in there, the resonance key. If we find it, we make history." "And if we don't?" Gregor grunted, his hand resting on the hilt of his machete. "Then we'll at least have a good story," Simon quipped, his grin failing to mask his unease. With a nod, Marcus led the way into the vault. The air grew colder as they descended, the flickering beams of their flashlights barely piercing the oppressive darkness. The walls were lined with strange carvings, symbols and patterns that seemed to shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. "It's like the walls are alive," Simon muttered. Elias stopped to examine one of the carvings, his fingers tracing its grooves. "These are ancient," he murmured. "Predate anything I've ever seen." "Keep moving," Marcus ordered. "We don't know what's down here." The first test. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center stood a pedestal, upon which rested a large polished stone that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. Surrounding the pedestal were concentric circles etched into the floor, each marked with intricate runes. "What is that?" Gregor asked, his voice echoing. "The resonance key?" Simon ventured. Elias shook his head. This is something else." Marcus approached cautiously, his boots crunching on the dusty floor. As he crossed the outermost circle, a low hum filled the chamber. The air vibrated, and the runes began to glow. Marcus?" Simon called. "You might want to step back." Before Marcus could react, a beam of light shot from the stone, striking the ceiling. The runes flared, and the ground shook. From the shadows emerged figures, humanoid but not entirely human. Their forms flickered, as if caught between reality and a dream. "Defenders," Elias whispered. "Guardians of the vault." "Whatever they are, they don't look friendly," Gregor growled, drawing his machete. The battle. The figures advanced, their movements fluid yet erratic. One lunged at Marcus, who barely dodged its clawed hand. Gregor swung his machete, the blade passing through the figure as if slicing through mist. "They're not solid," Gregor shouted. "They're not alive," Elias corrected. "They're echoes." Simon fumbled with a device on his belt, a handheld emitter he'd designed for situations just like this. He activated it, and a burst of high-frequency sound filled the chamber. The echoes recoiled, their forms flickering. "It's working!" Simon yelled, adjusting the frequency. "Then keep it up," Marcus ordered. With the echoes momentarily disoriented, the team made a dash for the far side of the chamber. The light from the stone dimmed as they crossed the final circle, and the echoes vanished. "Everyone okay?" Marcus asked, breathing heavily. "Define okay," Simon muttered, still clutching his emitter. The labyrinth beyond the chamber lay a labyrinth of twisting passages. The air grew heavier, and the oppressive silence was broken only by the team's labored breathing. Elias examined the carvings on the walls, his brow furrowed. These symbols, they're warnings. Warnings of what? Gregor asked. Of the consequences of disturbing the vault, Elias replied. It says the artifact we seek is bound to the fabric of time. Removing it could unravel things. Unravel things? Marcus repeated. Reality, Elias said grimly. Marcus clenched his jaw. We didn't come all this way to turn back now. Whatever the risks, we'll face them. The group pressed on, the passages growing narrower and more treacherous. At times, the walls seemed to close in, the air thick with an unnatural stillness. The echo chamber. After what felt like hours, they entered another chamber. This one was smaller, its walls covered in mirrors that reflected not only their images, but also fragments of their past. Is that me? Simon asked, staring at a reflection of himself as a child. The others saw similar reflections, moments from their lives playing out in the mirrored surfaces. It's a test, Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. The vault is testing us. What does it want? Marcus asked. Us, Elias replied. Our memories, our essence. It feeds on time. As they moved deeper into the chamber, the reflections grew more distorted, merging and fracturing. Marcus felt a strange pull, as if the mirrors were drawing him in. Don't look too closely, Elias warned. You'll lose yourself. With great effort, they navigated the chamber, averting their eyes from the hypnotic reflections. At the far end was a doorway, its frame glowing faintly. Through there, Marcus said, his voice strained. The final room. The doorway led to the heart of the vault, a vast circular room dominated by a pedestal. On it rested the resonance key, a crystalline artifact that seemed to pulse with a rhythm all its own. We found it, Simon breathed. Marcus approached the pedestal, but Elias grabbed his arm. Wait, we don't know what will happen if we take it. We don't have a choice, Marcus replied. This is what we came for. He reached for the key, and as his fingers touched it, the room erupted with light. The walls shimmered, and a deafening hum filled the air. What's happening? Gregor shouted. The vault is reacting, Elias yelled. It's collapsing. The escape. The ground shook violently as cracks spread across the floor. The team ran, the resonance key clutched tightly in Marcus's hand. The labyrinth seemed to twist and shift, passages collapsing behind them. This way, Marcus shouted, leading them through the chaos. As they neared the entrance, the echoes reappeared, more aggressive than before. Simon activated his emitter, but the device sparked and died. Out of juice! He yelled. Gregor swung his machete wildly, buying them precious seconds. The echoes swarmed, their forms flickering and merging. Move! Marcus yelled, pushing the others toward the exit. The price of time. They burst out of the vault just as it collapsed behind them, a deafening roar echoing through the valley. Dust and debris filled the air, and for a moment, all was silent. Marcus looked at the resonance key, its glow dim but steady. We did it. At what cost? Elias asked, his face pale. Marcus didn't reply. He felt a strange sensation in his chest, as if something fundamental had shifted. He glanced at his watch. It had stopped. What's wrong? Simon asked. Marcus shook his head. Nothing. Let's get out of here. Epilogue. Weeks later, back in the safety of their hideout, the team examined the resonance key. Scientists and collectors were already bidding fortunes for it, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they had unleashed something beyond their understanding. Late one night, he awoke to find the key glowing brighter than ever. Shadows danced on the walls, and whispers filled the air. Fragments of words, echoes of voices long forgotten. Marcus realized then that the vault had not released them. They had brought it with them. Time, once disturbed, would never be the same. The rain poured down in unrelenting sheets as the small boat creaked against the dock. Adrian Turner adjusted the collar of his oilskin jacket and stepped onto the wooden planks, the salt-laden wind cutting into his face. He glanced at the towering structure ahead, the Black Rock lighthouse, its beam cut through the storm, a lone sentinel in the chaos of the sea. "This is it," Adrian muttered, gripping the lantern in his hand. It was old and ornate, its brass surface etched with mysterious symbols. He had been tasked with delivering it to the lighthouse keeper, a man who had lived alone on the rock for decades. As he approached the iron door, it creaked open before he could knock. A wiry man in his 60s stood in the doorway, his piercing blue eyes scanning Adrian with an intensity that made him falter. "You're late," the man said, his voice rough like gravel. "Storm's worse than I thought," Adrian replied. "You must be Keeper Rowe." The man nodded and stepped aside. "Come in, quickly." The lighthouse interior. Inside, the lighthouse was dimly lit, the walls lined with shelves holding books, instruments, and strange artifacts. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the room. Adrian placed the lantern on the table. "Strange delivery for a lighthouse, don't you think?" he asked. Rowe ignored the question and examined the lantern. His hands, calloused and weathered, ran over the engravings with a familiarity that suggested he had seen it before. "It's been a long time," Rowe murmured. "What is it?" Adrian asked, curiosity overtaking his unease. Rowe's eyes met his, a responsibility and a curse. A warning ignored. Rowe motioned for Adrian to sit and poured 2 mugs of dark tea. "The lantern doesn't just guide ships," he began. "It guards something far older than this lighthouse, something that should never be disturbed." Adrian raised an eyebrow. "You mean the sea?" Rowe's expression hardened. "Number. The lantern keeps them at bay." "Them?" Adrian echoed. Rowe leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "Things that dwell beneath the waves, things that hunger for light." Adrian chuckled nervously. "Sounds like an old sailor's tale." Rowe's gaze didn't waver. "Believe what you want, but you're here now. That makes you part of it." Adrian drained his mug and stood. "Well, I've delivered the lantern. My job's done." "You can't leave," Rowe said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Adrian frowned. "Excuse me? The storm won't let you, and even if it did, they'd follow you." The lantern's light. Before Adrian could argue, the lighthouse shook violently. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the wind howling like a living thing. Rowe grabbed the lantern and lit it with a long match. The flame flickered to life, casting an eerie blue glow that filled the room. The symbols on the lantern began to shimmer, and a low hum resonated through the air. "What's happening?" Adrian asked, his voice rising. "They've noticed the light is out," Rowe said grimly. "We're too late." Suddenly, the sound of something heavy scraping against the stone walls echoed through the lighthouse. Adrian's heart raced. "What is that?" he whispered. Rowe didn't answer. He grabbed a long, rusted harpoon from the wall and thrust it into Adrian's hands. "You'll find out soon enough." The first attack. The door rattled violently, and then it came, a deafening roar that seemed to shake the very foundation of the lighthouse. Something slammed against the door, bending the iron inward. "Stay behind me!" Rowe barked, raising his own weapon, a wickedly sharp pike. The door burst open, and a monstrous figure lunged inside. It was humanoid but grotesquely deformed, its skin slick and glistening like that of a deep-sea creature. Its eyes glowed faintly in the lantern's light, and its jagged teeth gnashed hungrily. Rowe charged without hesitation, driving his pike into the creature's chest. It let out a guttural shriek and collapsed, its body dissolving into a pool of brackish water. Adrian stood frozen, the harpoon trembling in his hands. "Snap out of it," Roe shouted. "There'll be more." As if on cue, more roars sounded from outside, and the lighthouse shook again. The keeper's duty Roe slammed the door shut and bolted it. "They've grown bold," he muttered. "What are those things?" Adrian demanded. "They're called the drowned," Roe replied. "Souls claimed by the sea, twisted into something monstrous. They're drawn to the light, but the lantern keeps them from coming too close." Adrian shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane." "Insane or not, you're part of it now," Roe said. "If the lantern's flame dies, they'll overrun the lighthouse. And if they take the light—" He trailed off, his expression grim. "What happens if they take it?" Adrian pressed. "They'll unleash the Deep One," Roe said quietly. "Their master. And then the world will drown." The siege. The hours that followed were a blur of chaos and terror. The drowned assaulted the lighthouse in waves, their forms twisting and writhing as they tried to breach the defenses. Adrian fought alongside Roe, the harpoon feeling foreign in his hands. Each strike was a desperate act of survival, and each victory felt hollow as more creatures surged forward. "They're endless," Adrian shouted. "They always are," Roe replied, his voice steady despite the carnage. The lantern's glow began to dim, its flame flickering ominously. Roe's eyes widened. "The lantern's failing." "What do we do?" Adrian asked, panic creeping into his voice. "We have to rekindle it," Roe said. "Follow me." The heart of the lighthouse Roe led Adrian to a hidden hatch in the floor. Beneath it was a narrow staircase spiraling down into darkness. "What's down there?" Adrian asked. "The source of the light," Roe replied. They descended into the bowels of the lighthouse, the air growing colder with each step. At the bottom was a chamber bathed in an eerie glow. At its center was a pedestal, upon which rested a small crystal. Roe approached it reverently. "This is the heart of the lighthouse. It fuels the lantern, but it needs to be recharged." "How?" Adrian asked. Roe turned to him, his expression grim. "With a sacrifice." The ultimate decision. Adrian stared at Roe in disbelief. "You're kidding." Roe shook his head. "The heart requires life energy to burn brightly again. It's the only way to keep the lantern lit and the drowned at bay." Before Adrian could respond, the chamber trembled. The drowned had breached the upper levels. Their roars echoed down the staircase. "We're out of time," Roe said, drawing a knife. "I've served long enough. It's my turn." "No," Adrian said, stepping forward. "There has to be another way." "There isn't," Roe insisted. "The keeper's duty is to protect the light, and now it's yours." Before Adrian could protest, Roe plunged the knife into his own chest. The heart absorbed the energy, glowing brighter as Roe collapsed to the ground. The new keeper. The lighthouse trembled, but the lantern's flame roared back to life, driving the drowned away. Adrian stumbled back up the stairs, his mind reeling. The storm had subsided, leaving the lighthouse eerily quiet. Adrian stood alone in the keeper's quarters, the weight of his new responsibility pressing heavily on him. He glanced at the lantern, its symbols glowing faintly. The light was safe, for now. But he knew the drowned would return, and when they did, he would be ready. Adrian Turner was now the keeper of the lantern,